The animated scene brings us to young Pink and two friends. They're running toward a train track, but symbolically, that play hides a deeper truth. They are running into destiny without knowing it. Train tracks almost always stand for predetermined paths. They're straight, fixed, and they only lead to one place. Tracks don't allow choice. In Jungian terms, they're the collective path laid down by society, history, even ancestry. The individual doesn't really choose it, they're born into it. That archetypal forces move beneath consciousness, shaping us long before we are aware. What looks like a child's game is actually an unconscious initiation. The psyche is rushing toward inevitable fate. The fact that they run together shows this isn't Pink's personal destiny, it's generational. Every boy growing up in post-war Britain is on the same rails. School, discipline, and collective trauma. Jung would say the collective unconscious is swallowing them as a group. If they were just walking, it would suggest hesitation. But running means eagerness, almost blind compulsion. Psychologically, archetypes have a magnetic pull, and without knowing it, we hurry right into them. Pink's father went off to war on these same rails, so when we see the boy running toward them, it suggests he's unconsciously following his father's footsteps. It's the inherited path of the dead father. Later in the film, trains appear again, but carrying soldiers off to war. That makes this childhood game feel like a rehearsal for annihilation. The train in the movie carries the father archetype, the force of the collective will. A train belongs to the collective. It's the grinding movement of society that consumes the individual. It's the collective unconscious emotion. No one controls it personally. If the tracks represent the path laid down by society, then boarding the train takes it further. Once you step inside, you're no longer outside looking at faith. You're carried by it. A train doesn't stop for an individual. It runs on a schedule. It has a predetermined path. This is the ego being absorbed into the collective unconscious. Individual choice dissolves. You can only be transported. That's why trains are often showed up in dreams, and in this film. They're images of how history, society, and archetypal forces carry us, whether we want them to or not. For Pink, the image of the train isn't just transportation, it's the war machine, the school system, the very structure of a society that crushes individuality. To ride it is to surrender to the collective destiny of his generation. When he lays the bullets on the rails, he's symbolically submitting them to fate, to the train itself. It's almost a ritual of sacrifice, as if the child is offering up his tiny weapons of the self to the overwhelming machine of history. And in doing so, the message is clear. The death machine will consume everything. Play is the psyche's way of rehearsing fate. Those bullets are fragments of the shadow. The train, by contrast, is the full archetype of death and fate in motion. Pink's aggression is already swallowed up by the system, and as the train almost runs him down, Pink dodges the train. On the literal level, he avoids being killed, but symbolically, his ego can't stand against the machine. This is the ego, overwhelmed by archetype. He survives physically, but the imprint is clear. You don't oppose fate, you submit to it. And as the train goes past, it's crowded with passengers, each one of them hidden behind the same mask. The image shifts to something even more unsettling. This is the collective persona in its purest form. Individuality erased, identity absorbed into the faceless whole. The train becomes the conformity of society in motion. For a brief instant, Pink slips into the mask momentarily, absorbed by the collective unconscious. He is shown what awaits him, the loss of his own face. This is the danger of identification with the archetype when the ego dissolves into collective shadow. This all happened in a tunnel. Tunnels often symbolize the unconscious and rebirth. A teacher is already there, waiting. He yells, "Stand still, laddie," stopping him in his tracks. The scene doesn't show Pink wanting to progress, but that's the point. Even if he had wanted to, the teacher blocks the way. The possibility of transformation is cut off. Instead of emerging renewed from the unconscious, Pink is intercepted. A few minutes later, that same teacher is now at dinner with his wife. He is dominated, infantilized. He takes that wound and passes it on to his students. This is the shadow in motion. He projects onto students. A man trapped in a cycle of humiliation that keeps repeating. After the school rebellion, Pink's wife starts stripping beside him, yet all we see is her shadow. She doesn't appear as a real living partner, only as projection. This is the Anima reduced to a shadow figure, an outline without depth, a hollow, unreachable image of the feminine. There's singing in the background during the scene, a song built entirely around questions asking, "Mother, should I?" to everything. It's a plea for protection and guidance, but also a confession of dependence. The mother figure becomes the gatekeeper of his fate. This stands as the inverse of Filter's "Take My Picture." In that song, the question is directed at the father, demanding recognition. So where Filter dramatizes the hunger for the father's approval, Pink Floyd shows us the opposite. The son bound to the mother's control, asking permission to even exist. Between the two, we see the archetypal poles, the absent father whose shadow demands recognition, and the devouring mother, whose presence suffocates growth. There's a quick but powerful moment of young Pink lying in a bed, while a doctor examines him. The image is, she doesn't protect him with truth, she protects him with secrecy. She feeds fear instead of strength. This is the devouring mother archetype, overprotective, neurotic, and dramatic. She keeps him dependent. There's a moment with Pink as an adult, sitting at a piano, clearly strung out. His wife enters, waves to catch his attention, says something, and then simply leaves. No concern, just casual detachment. It's something deeper. The Anima projection has collapsed. The wife doesn't connect. Where the mother was neurotically overbearing, the wife is the opposite, distant and disengaged. Together, they form another wound in Pink's mind. 36 minutes in, we hear the line, "Mama, I didn't mean to get so high." It's both an apology and a confession. It reveals that the maternal complex has followed him into adulthood. The overprotective, neurotic mother, who never let him grow, now becomes the voice of guilt inside his head. His escape into drugs is framed as disobedience to her, as if he still needs permission, even to numb his pain. The next sequence moves into animation. Two flowers appear, clearly male and female. At first they dance, drawn together by attraction, but almost immediately, the female flower turns violent, devouring the male in a vicious attack. This is Pink's Anima, the inner image of women, revealed in shadow form. Instead of nurturing, it consumes. The Anima doesn't guide him toward wholeness, it pulls him deeper into destruction. What should be a union becomes a devouring, another vision of how distorted his inner life has become. Around the 40-minute mark, the tone changes. A group of women walk straight through security with no resistance at all. That detail matters. It shows how Eros bypasses rules, law, and authority. This is the Dionysian principle breaking in. Intoxicating, chaotic, boundary-shattering. It's the archetypal feminine in its rawest form. Instinctual, irrational, and overwhelming. Around 40 minutes in, one of the girls who slipped through security makes her way into Pink's trailer. Pink is slumped in a chair, almost absent from his body. She touches him, trying to draw him out. She carries the Anima, the inner image of women that lives in every man's psyche, and which should serve as a bridge to Eros, the principle of love and connection and life energy. But for Pink, the Anima has collapsed into shadow. Instead of guiding him toward intimacy, it brings him pain. So when she reaches for him, he doesn't see her as an individual. He sees the destructive Anima that has haunted him since his childhood. He explodes in rage. The fury isn't really against her, but against what she represents in his psyche. Eros, the life force that should connect them, instead collapses into aggression. In Jung's view, this is the tragedy of projection. The woman becomes the archetype, and then love vanishes. After his rage, the film cuts to Pink in a pool, bleeding again. But over it, we see images of his wife with another man. Death and desire collapse into one. Here, Thanatos, death, dissolution, and destruction, and Eros, the life force of union, intertwine. The polarity of life and death is fused. Intimacy becomes betrayal. For Pink, this is no separation anymore. Every attempt at connection drags him deeper into destruction. At about 50 minutes in, Pink sits bleeding in front of the television. The camera pulls back, and the room itself transforms. It becomes a hollow shell, flat blue walls and floors. Like the empty space from the film's opening, he is alone with the screen. Out of the corner of the wall, a figure begins to move, a woman's shadow. She sneaks behind him, then morphs into a monster. This is the Anima in her darkest form. No longer a living person, no longer a projection, but an autonomous figure rising straight out of the unconscious. Pink sits paralyzed, frozen, swallowed by forces bigger than himself. The scene cuts again, this time to young Pink running through a vast empty field. No trees, no shelter. A life without purpose. It's the archetype of loneliness. Next, Pink stands before a massive wall, stretching endlessly in every direction. There's no way around it. This is the archetypal wall of the psyche, where the ego meets the unconscious and realizes its limits. Then the film cuts abruptly to Pink's home. Lining up objects, faced with the impossibility of scaling the Great Wall, he retreats into ritual, arranging small things he can control. The Great Wall is the collective barrier. The lined up objects are the personal wall. This is the neurosis in action. Energy that could have gone toward growth gets diverted into obsession. Right after obsessively placing objects around, Pink shaves his own eyebrows. This is self-dehumanization. Pink is erasing his own identity. It's the collapse of the persona. But instead of peeling away the false mask to reach his authentic self, he mutilates his face into emptiness, even erases his own humanity. About 1 hour in, young Pink walks through a battlefield. He's really walking through the archetype of Thanatos, the collective shadow of death and destruction that claimed his father. Vulnerable and powerless, he becomes the eternal child, wandering through chaos. He eventually arrives at a hospital, a place that should symbolize healing. In the corner, he finds his older self, isolated. Symbolically, the sequence takes us from collective death to wounded childhood to the imprisoned adult psyche. It's a dreamlike vision of how war and loss hollowed Pink out long before he even reached adulthood. We see Pink again in the chair, his archetypal prison. The ego sits paralyzed. His manager and crew descend, not as helpers, but as agents of the collective will. They don't see a suffering man. They see a product, a mask that must be kept intact. The needle is forced into him, not as medicine, but as violation, an artificial spark to animate the persona, the social mask demanded by the crowd. The soul collapses deeper into shadow, while the body is pushed forward as spectacle. This moment reveals the machine in its purest brutality. The ego shattered, the self silenced, yet the persona reanimated. While Pink's manager and crew are in the room, forcing him back into performance, the film cuts to his childhood again. This time he finds a rat and carries it home. The rat is a shadow symbol, feared, rejected, but for a lonely child it becomes a secret companion. When he brings it inside, his mother panics. She rejects it outright, forcing him to hide it. She is rejecting not the animal, but the part of Pink it represents. His instinctive shadow. He hides the rat, repressing what could have been integrated. And suddenly, the shadow rejected, the mother devouring, the authority cold and clinical. The rat he once befriended turns up dead, a symbol of how his repressed shadow has rotted away. The needle driven into him as an adult shows the same truth. He is hollow, rotting from the inside out. With no self left to hold on to, Pink adopts the dictator persona as his own. He isn't performing anymore. He is possessed by the collective shadow. Individuation has failed. He has lost himself completely. We see him again in a hospital bathroom stall, dipping his hand in the toilet and putting his fingers in his mouth. An image of ultimate degradation. The ego feeding on filth. The place of cleansing becomes a site of contamination. The final animation seals the vision. Pink is abused into insanity, then blamed for it. It is the archetype of the scapegoat, the individual broken by the machine and held responsible for his own collapse. Pink's journey has ended not in wholeness, but in possession. The wall is complete, and the self has been buried behind it.